It is a little bit of weird timing on time, but I'd like to make it a big 10-day. Like they did a few years ago. Yeah, here at Travel Lane, huh? I know Brittany, I've met Brittany a number of times.
Chamber, yeah. Very closely with the chamber.
Yeah, that's what I assumed, yeah, so, excellent, fantastic.
As a matter of fact, she's presenting to our board tomorrow.
Oh, fun.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so being the VP of HR, we get stuck managing that for the whole corporation.
Oh, my God.
Trying to manage physical.
You saw the lunch, right?
I did, I'll have to keep that in mind next time I stop at this fast food joint on the way here.
Oh, good afternoon. You don't know if it's your first meeting.
Right?
Okay, we're gonna get started.
Yeah, I used to attend as a guest back before COVID. So I did remotely for a while, and honestly,
Good afternoon, Airport Advisory Committee members and guests. It is September 27th, 2023 at 12 noon, and I'm calling this meeting to order. Team EUG is committed to creating a welcoming and safe community for everyone and a place where every person can experience a sense of belonging. The Airport Advisory Committee is committed to maintaining a respectful environment for all committee members and guests. I would like to start by asking guests at today's meeting to introduce themselves. We'll do that in just a minute. The purpose of this committee is to develop recommendations for city staff by providing an ongoing citizen perspective and review of the Airport Activity Report, Airport Capital Improvement Program, Airport Enterprise Fund, budgeting process, and changes to the airport administration policy. As stated in the committee bylaws, members have the obligation to consider the welfare of the entire city and to be fair, objective, and courteous. We have established the following meeting decorum guidelines to ensure a cohesive and equitable environment for committee members and guests. Guests at the meeting are asked to sign in and introduce themselves when asked. Public comment at the end of each meeting shall be limited to 10 minutes unless a majority of the committee members present vote to extend the time. The presiding officer shall establish a time limit for each speaker and may limit the number of speakers. Before I turn the floor over to Catherine Stevens for the airport director's report, I'd like for the guests to please introduce themselves.
John DeCoster.
Mariah Mulcahy, the environmental project manager for the airport.
Devin Sherrill, regional transportation manager for the airport.
Lieutenant Pope, administration and financial compliance manager for the airport.
Dean Inouye, TSA manager.
Steve Kretzinger. Steve Bolton.
Are there any guests online, Randy?
Yes, there are 2 guests online, and the guests, Adam Walters,
Rodney Harris, Sky Harbor.
and Adam, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Hi, Adam Walters, Southwest Airlines.
With that, I will give the floor to Catherine Stevens for the airport director's report.
Thank you, Chair Goldberg. And I just want to note, so we also have Chuck Mueller, who's with airport staff, and then Matt Rodriguez, our assistant city manager, is joining us online today as well. Okay, so we will hop right in. We have didn't have a meeting in July. We had a barbecue in August, and so we're getting back to regular meetings now in September. So Andrew's going to talk about the activity report. I know you've received each of these reports every month, but we'll focus mainly on the August report then.
August.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, just for the sake of time, the 3 June, July, and August also similar numbers and similar activities. So we'll just jump right forward to the August one. Operations and air carrier lanyards down. But then again, as we've been seeing, you couple that with in-plane passengers and total passengers up. That really just marks a shift to mainline aircraft versus our regional aircraft. So fewer flights, but more seats. Total year-to-date total passengers in August, 8% up over last year. Remembering that last year was just a banner year with 32% growth over the year before, or over 2019, I should say. Load factors up really strong. And then you can see the market shares with Southwest leading the way, United right behind, and then the rest pretty much where they generally land. Air cargo, again, we've been having the same story. Really, Alaska Airlines leaving the cargo market in our area. Cargo has just never rebounded. And then next slide, we can see departure and seat capacity for October of this year. So similar stories, right? Departures, even though we removed those main line, we're actually seeing departures come up again. So that's great because we, you can see the seat capacity is up, departures is up. So that just means more and more options for our community.
There we go.
And the next one, please, Andy.
It's changed on my computer, but it's not uploading on the.
Okay, I'll keep going. Hopefully it'll cycle through. But again, this did get sent out to everyone and we can get anyone a copy that needs it. So for February of 24, looking ahead, we see 11% increase in departures. There we go. It's up now. Seat capacity continues to rise. So all in all, a really strong picture for flights here at UG. Then when we look at employments, still looking strong in that 82% load factors for this year and last year was 1% lower, but still that 3% growth in employments. So still seeing growth, maybe not the meteoric growth we saw before, but 3% is pretty sustainable. Then we look at our general aviation comparisons. So our graph on the left shows us compared to other airports in the region, Medford, Redmond, and Boise. So you can see our local operations are pretty stable and up from back in 2021. And you kind of see that similar picture, slightly different, but overall not seeing huge dramatic shifts. Then our itinerant, you can see a comparison of 2021, 22, 23. Again, Eugene is in that light green. You got Medford, Redmond, and Boise in that order along the graph. So strong itinerant growth, especially in Eugene. You can see that's a pretty big increase for us. So things are looking good. And then we'll move into the financials with Patricia.
And I'm going to just do a point of order for just a moment. On the agenda, we missed introducing a couple of new board members that we have. So I want to loop back around and welcome Mike Patty to the Airport Advisory Committee. Mike is a part of the PAPE group. And correct me if I get all this wrong. He works in the properties area for PAPE and does some work around airports as part of that. So thank you for joining us as one of our advisory committee members. And then Joshua Rickert is the director of the Lane Aviation Academy, and he is joining us. I'll probably have an opportunity to talk one day, give us a little report about how things are going with the Aviation Academy, he's really done an amazing job. I know you all three programs are on a wait list now, which is a huge accomplishment. So we'll look forward to hearing from you in the future about the program. All right, on to financials.
All right, so I just wanted to touch on June in particular because that's the end of our fiscal year. And if you look at the amount on the bottom, you can see that even after a $7 million transfer to capital funds, we ended the year just under $1 million. And good. So if we can go to July. Okay. Well, July finished. We did another $3 million transfer to capital, and we ended, even with an ARPA reimbursement, we were at a negative 1.7 million, but that's fine. We've got cash reserves to cover that. And there it is there. You can see it at the bottom. So that's the first month in our new year. So then in August, let's see if we can get to August. In August, you'll see that we did recover. We ended in a positive of $364,000. I think we have some graphs to go over. Yeah. All right, so this is a bit of a eye chart here. But if you look at the gray color, you'll see July and August has all of the years. And you can see that the gray in both July and August is well above the previous years, even 2019. So revenue's looking good. You can look at the same two at the beginning. You'll see expenses up a bit, a little bit down from last year, but not too bad of an increase compared to the revenue. And I'd just like to say that the ability to make the revenue and retain capital is the result of the hard work that we've done over the last 3 years. We've been plugging up holes and just making some really healthy choices. All right.
Questions on the financial report?
You can always email me if you have any questions.
All right, so I want to take the opportunity just to kind of go over the current projects we're looking at and also give you kind of a, maybe it's your first time, kind of a look at what we're going to be doing. And for some of you, kind of a recap with maybe a few things reshuffled. Just want to make sure you're up to date with the timeline. So this first slide is a bit of an eye chart. We're just testing to see who needs glasses in the room. Definitely me. So this is basically just an outline of all the projects I'm about to talk about. So we can skip forward to our current projects. And the first one we're going to talk about is our new QTA, quick turnaround facility, commonly known as our car wash, but it does a lot more than that. This is for our rental car agencies. So this is about to come online. I was just talking to Devin, and all the paperwork starting to come together. So hoping to get it online here in the next week or two. Design happened in November and early 2022. Construction started in July. Like I said, it's the facility itself is built. It was really just contracting that's stopped us from bringing it online. Cost of about $9 million. So with sustainability in mind, we went rooftop solar. I think we've talked about how that's a pilot project for to see how that would work with our terminal expansion in the future. We have EV charging capable infrastructure there, which I'm told the rental car agencies are moving forward with putting the charging units in. And we've got a water reclamation tanks for the car wash system. So reusing the water until it's not usable anymore for washing. So oh, CFCs, sorry. So that's all paid for by the rental car agencies. So no general fund tax dollars really with any project or airport revenue. So really great. We have our covered walkway. That's still in process. We've had some kind of construction snafus. They actually built it too tall. So if it seemed too tall when you drove in, it was too tall. So we're going to mitigate that. But this will really help us get people out of the elements when they're walking for the economy lot. Design was in April of 2022. Construction we started, early summer. It's still going. It's about $1 million. Really looking forward to getting that height appropriate and getting it online for people to use. Then we did the taxiways Charlie and Mike rehab along with other improvements. So basically asphalt rehabilitation for Charlie, Mike, Kilo, November, and Papa. Design was in 2022 through early of this year. Construction started in June. It's ongoing. It's really been going really well. A few delays just because of this rain. So really it's weather dependent, but we're right on the finish line. As long as we can get some clear days, we're on the home stretch on this one. For sustainability, up to 30% of shoulder asphalt contains recycled asphalt material. That is a limit that's set by the FAA, so we try to go to the max on that. Then we've got our new RON pads with the affiliated FOTS, which is the fiber for our FAA facility and instrumentation. So that new concrete apron that we've talked about before, 5 new aircraft spots that can fit our commercial mainline aircraft. Design was in 2022, lasted almost a year. Construction, we started in May, it's ongoing. Same thing, it's 90% plus done, just needs some non-rainy days to drive us towards the finish line. Cost just shy of 19 million. Same thing, about 30% of our shoulder asphalt is recycled. Then looking into the future, we've got our beacon. We're going to get a new beacon to replace this one. This one's reached its end of life, service life. So design should be in the spring of next year, and then put it in place next year. And anticipated location for that is going to be out by our SRE buildings. We're going to move it from where it's at, because where it's at right now, it gets in the way of our road realignment, which I'll touch on in a second. Then also the project that we were going to do this year, but got pushed for multiple reasons, is taxiways Juliet and Lima widening down by our air cargo facility to allow larger aircraft to utilize that ramp area down there. So hopefully doing that early summer, so July of next year, at a cost of about 16.5 million, and again utilizing that recycled asphalt material as allowed. Then our airfield maintenance and SRE building. So those buildings, they're definitely reaching the end of their life cycle. We'll replace those with a new dual purpose facility, hoping to start design on that in the spring, and then start construction that same year, but towards the end of the year, 2024. Cost of about 5.5 million. And for sustainability, we'll adhere to the Eugene CAP 2.0 components. And then there's that public road, public access road realignment that I touched on. So this will realign the entry roadway, bring it up to a much safer level, basically eliminate that left-hand turn you have to take to get to the taxiway. So that'll be great.
Taxiway.
Did I say taxiway? Oh my gosh. Full disclosure, I have a soul cold and I am riding the Robitussin Dragon right now. So if I mess up my words, I apologize. Anticipated construction, May of 2025, approximate cost around $10 million. And again, we'll reuse recycled asphalt wherever possible. And then we've got some wetland mitigation at the end of runway 34 right. So right on the approach, we're gonna do that to reduce hazards to wildlife upon approach on that runway. Design, spring of 2025, construction that fall, about $1.8 million. And then we start into the fun stuff, right, or the big stuff. Terminal expansion, phase 1. So this is our ticket lobby, airline office space, and that new baggage handling system, and that inline TSA baggage screening. The TSA designated or thought that Eugene, hey, you need it. We're willing to pay for the screening equipment. We have to build everything around it, but excited to have TSA buy in and get that new inline system. It'll really make a difference to our throughput for our passengers. Anticipated design later this year through, and it'll take about a year. And then construction, we're on a tight timeline this because of the TSA funding. So we're really going to push hard for that November 2024 start. And then again, City Eugene Cap Point 2.0. And then moving towards the future, construct new concrete apron to accommodate even more round positions. And again, this will eventually be used as the apron for when they do the concourse expansion. Anticipated design starting spring of next year, hopefully construction 2025, about 11.2 million. And these areas look really small on the map, but I tell you what, I went out there and walked it yesterday and it's like, that's a lot of concrete. It's a really big area, so. And then new landscape shop. So this is something that has to happen for that new concourse to happen. So the landscape shop where it's at needs to move. So we're going to replace it in a different location. Hopefully design starts late next year with construction starting in the fall of the following year, about $4 million. And again, CAP 2.0. And then parking. It seems like we can never build enough parking. So our next space that we have available is expanding that economy lot. So at least double it, if not more. Hopefully get design going on that spring of 2025 and start construction 2026, about $7 million. And we use recycled asphalt wherever possible. And then for the C concourse expansion, we're going to have to do some EWED infrastructure relocation. So in order to make the whole expansion happen, start design in spring of 2025, do the work in 2026, about 8.3 million. And then our concourse A apron is showing some age, and so we recognize it needs to be rehabilitated. So April 2025 to start design, construction starting in May of 2026, about 14.4 million. And then again, more parking. So this time long-term parking. So that's really reclaiming that QTA lot, the old QTA. So that's allowing us to use that area, repurpose it, and expand long-term and short-term. Oh, I just lost it. Anticipated design in 2025, construction 2026, about 10 million, and we'll use that recycled asphalt. And then the Concourse C building expansion. Hopefully anticipated design in 26. It'll take about, roughly a year. Really hope to have shovels in ground May of 2027. There's that $250 million price tag. And then, obviously we'll be using CAP 2.0 and Envision, and really sustainability is the forefront of our efforts on the expansion. And then our runways, it's a never ending thing, right? So now our taxiways, Bravo, Bravo 1, Bravo 3, Bravo 4 are due for rehabilitation. Design in spring of 26, start construction spring of 27, about 13.7 million. And again, that 30% asphalt recycled. And then our main runway rehabilitation, design spring of 27, actual construction spring of 28, about 19.2 million. And then we also need to expand our Concourse A hold room. I don't know if you've been in Concourse A during the midday, the noon to 2 p.m., but it's it's a lot of people in there. So we need to expand those rooms to make them size appropriate for having the type of aircraft we have there now. Design 2028, construction 2029, about 14 million. And I'll pass it to Catherine.
Okay, and just to note on that, the C concourse expansion. So most of the projects we just talked about are enabling projects leading up to the big C concourse expansion. That, of course, we'll need to find the funding for that. The other projects, enabling projects, we've pretty much been able to identify funding through our entitlement funding, through some discretionary funding, so most of the work you see up there, we've identified funding. That C concourse piece is the piece that we're still going to need to work on funding, likely through a bond process. So questions about those projects?
I have so my question is specific to sort of the life of the projects. Is there a are these 20-year life projects? Like, when's the reinvestment cycle on them?
Yeah, really good question. So typically pavement, if it's asphalt, the life is 20 years. But you really start needing to plan for that around the 15-year mark and get it queued up in your CIP, your capital improvement program. If it's concrete typically has about a 40-year life. And so that apron area that we're talking about around the A concourse pier, that's actually the asphalt portion, not the concrete portion. But then, like the new heavy pads that we were building this right now should have a 40-year life to them. So it depends. And then buildings, of course, it's a little bit more fluid, right? We hope to build always longer than we project, right? Yep, exactly. We're trying to, we've tinkered with our IT system, so we're really hoping that people online can hear us and we can also hear each other in the room.
Great. So you talked a lot about the construction projects leading up to the concourse expansion being put in place to help support that. So that's assuming that goes forward. Are any of these projects leading up to it contingent on that eventual concourse expansion? And is there timing of when they would start versus when you get full on approval of the concourse C, or do you already have that?
So they are all of the components that touch the building basically are contingent on being able to, we have to get those done. That's why we call them enabling projects before we can build the C concourse. But we have identified funding for all of those. And the latest funding source being the TSA saying that they would like to give us this grant for a fully inline bag system, which is huge. So we're still waiting to hear for sure on that, but they came to us, so we're feeling pretty confident about that. And then we will also need to apply for one of the terminal grants to be able to build the infrastructure around it. But with that link back to the TSA grant, we feel pretty confident about achieving some of that funding as well.
I guess maybe another way to say it is all of those projects being put in place. What if Concourse C doesn't happen, but you've spent all this money leading up to make it? Or do you feel like Concourse C is a definitive project, so there is no more question around, is that expansion going to happen?
I mean, I think it's a definitive project. we need that fully inline bag system anyway. And it's going to be planned, so it's a standalone. We just kind of revised some scoping so that we can do it a phased approach, mainly to hit that TSA grant timeline. But we could, ultimately, we could always just pivot and we could jump to expanding the A concourse hold room instead of building the C concourse first. So, there's always options.
I guess my question is related.
Hold it down, 3 seconds.
We're all learning.
Is it working out? Yeah. My question is related to, I'm sorry for being late, but I saw that we had the Concourse A expansion. Initially, I think that was looked at the same time as the Concourse C project. Is that now a separate thing? And have we identified sources for revenue or for building that part in 2028?
Yeah, good question. So the price tag is so big. I think that's why, we're really trying to come up with a bunch of different options. So looking at phasing, even though, in a perfect world, the magic wand would come out and we would do all of this all at once, right? Because we do need the expansion in the A hold rooms and the C concourse. But to try and just get a handle on the price tag, because really that price tag right now is about 300 million for everything that we need. And if we want to really build a world-class facility that supports a lot of the things that we're seeing happening in our own community, it might be close to 500 million. So we've got to kind of at least look at phasing to see, okay, if we can't do all of it at once, maybe we can pick this off. Again, thrilled that the TSA came, to us with that opportunity so we can have yet one more enabling project.
Is most of the funding federal funding? So I know obviously Concourse C is going to be bond money. So is there state funding, city funding, or is primarily this coming from federal funds?
So there's no general fund dollars for the city. Most of these enabling projects are paid for through our entitlement funding. So it's the amount that we obtain every year annually. There's some discretionary funding, which is projects that the FAA identifies as priority, which pretty much anymore it is only for runways and some taxiways. And then there are other opportunities like the Connect Oregon program, which is we have a grant for the Lima Juliet taxiway expansion. That's a Connect Oregon grant with airport matching funds. And then the C concourse, or any amount of this expansion that we would need to bond. Ultimately, that expense is paid by the airlines through their rates and charges and through passenger facility charges. So we haven't worked out all the detail on what that will look like yet, but historically it could be a passenger facility charge backed bond.
Thank you.
Any more questions on that? Okay, great. Anything on these? Okay. Let's see. So I can run through, we kind of put this in as a placeholder in case there's things. So we just kind of talked about the Trex update, and we haven't really come up with a name for our expansion yet. I think maybe we need to run a contest to come up with a cool name. As far as legislative affairs, you may be seeing the discussion out there on a government shutdown. I hate to be pessimistic, but it is looking like that will happen. And so what happens to airports when we have a government shutdown is the tower stays open, the TSA still comes to work, but they are often not getting their paychecks, unfortunately. So the last time this happened, which, gosh, it's been several years, is in the pre-pandemic era. We tried to provide as much support as we could to our federal workers because that's pretty hard to come to work every day and not getting a paycheck. So we will plan on putting those supports in place again if needed. And then as far as air service, we've got a couple of airline meetings coming up. the airlines have kind of gone to a more hybrid model. So some of them will be at headquarters and some of them will be online, which is fine. But what we're hearing from our airline partners is that they're very pleased with how our routes are performing, and that we still have some of the same issues we've been dealing with pilot shortage and fleet, not enough fleet availability. But they're also telling us that they can't wait for our 5 heavy pads to come online because they're going to fill them up. And they've told us when the C concourse gets built, they're going to fill them up. So I have to hand it to our airline partners. They are really figuring out how to maximize our facility as is, because as you know, we reached full capacity in May of 21. But they've continued to add. And so instead of having 3 peak periods during the day, one peak period early morning, we now have 3 peak periods for the day. I wouldn't be surprised if they figure out a way to add a 4th peak period. We maybe see some, we had that Chicago red eye flight. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we saw 1 or 2 red eyes come back, actually, to be able to continue to utilize the facility as much as they can. So it's good news. Okay, well, we're going to move on to, unless anybody had any questions about that, we're going to move on to the general aviation lease issues. And I'm going to just give you some thoughts, and then I'm going to kick it off to our consultant who's coming to town for this meeting today. So just so I have my thoughts together, because I too am riding the Robitussin Dragon, as Andrew says. So since this is kind of a communication that will be going out to our general aviation community tonight, we're having our annual GA tenant meeting. It's at 5:30 tonight here. And so this is what I'll be communicating to them. We're recording this meeting, and so this will be a resource also for our GA tenants that aren't able to make the meeting tonight. So they can go back and read that. Since our last meeting last year, I've been able to communicate with several folks from the GA community on several issues impacting the general aviation community, including meeting leaseholders individually, in small group settings, and in larger format GA tenant meetings. So at this fall's meeting, I welcome the opportunity to again update our general aviation tenants on our work addressing ground leasing issues at EUG, and listening to concerns, and definitely listening to any suggestions that we can consider moving forward through this process. So setting the framework for our work is the mission of the Eugene Airport, which is to maintain the highest standard of aviation safety and security while fostering positive experiences for all stakeholders as a valuable community partner and key regional economic driver. One of our guiding principles is providing an exceptional and positive experience for all internal and external stakeholders of the airport by fostering all types of aviation, both traditional and emergent. And through this framework, we value and support our general aviation stakeholders at EUG. So with these principles in mind, over the last few years, Team EUG has conducted a full A to Z review of our policies, procedures, and contracting practices. The purpose of that review is to ensure that airport management strikes the appropriate balance between our federal grant assurances, other legal obligations, and the needs of our airport users. While striking that balance has inherent tensions, all stakeholders, the Federal Aviation Administration, our city sponsor, and airport users have a common interest in seeing our regional airport positioned in the strongest fiscal and future-ready stance. So about the change process. In 2020, Eugene Airport staff were tasked with conducting a review of all aspects of managing EUG and embarking on an organizational change process. And through that competitive request for proposal process, Landerman Brown was selected as our airport financial consultant of record. In collaboration with EUG staff, L&B completed a full review of our rate model, built a new rates and charges model, updated the airport rules and standards, completed a full review of our ground leases, and recommended the implementation of 3 key performance indicators. The firm is currently working on a new passenger facility charge grant application, an updated airline operating agreement, and developing potential options for funding for the terminal building expansion. The goal of making these changes is to ensure EUG is being a responsible steward of community resources, the federal investment, the regional airport facility, and our community as a whole. We continue to work closely with all interested stakeholders, including FAA compliance officials, to ensure our path forward is as fair and equitable as possible. So I thank you for your patience as we move through this process. I definitely welcome a dialogue to address any concerns and questions. And now I'd like to introduce John DeCoster. He's with DCOM Aviation Consulting. He was previously with Landerman Brown, and he's been working on our ground lease review and leasing policy recommendations. So John is going to walk us through a presentation here to give us a little overview. Some of this you all have seen before in various versions, but we thought it'd be good to have a refresher. So John, thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
So seconds.
Better? Okay, I'm now, okay. As Catherine mentioned, thank you, Catherine. As Catherine mentioned, my name is John DeCoster. I'll go through, give you a little background about my aviation background in a second, but wanted to just identify the agenda items we'll be talking about today. The leasing policy, the why. Why are we going in this direction? Talk a little bit about grant assurances. It's a very popular topic and something that's got to be complied with from an airport standpoint. Talk about industry standards and best practices for land leases, the land lease rates and escalation provisions, lease premises and the definition of that, leasehold improvements, and what options do exist at the end of the existing leases, and then just do a quick summary. As I mentioned, or as Catherine mentioned, I've been in aviation since 1995. I started out as a regional director of airport affairs for Northwest Airlines. I had until 2012 when I retired the first time. In that role, I was responsible for all of the Midwest region for 8 years and then the West region for the last 4 years. So I've had pretty much from Chicago out through Hawaii and Alaska as far as airport exposures and meeting with every size, type, and whatever kind of airport. That was very valuable for me because at Northwest, we were expected to know everything that was happening in the airport, whether it was general aviation, concession contracts, parking contracts, whatever. So it kind of primed me for being able to dig into these things, unlike some of my colleagues that were really just more focused about the airline rates and charges base. In 2007, I retired from Northwest and joined another gentleman who was with Continental Airlines. We started an aviation consulting firm for business services. We wanted to focus on the smaller airports. All the consulting firms that we dealt with love to work in Los Angeles and Seattle and Chicago because there's these big contracts and you make a lot of money. What we saw in our time working with the airports is that the small airport community did not have the resources available to them that the large airports did. And so when you get into business things, and many times small airports have people that have been there for a long time or came from the community and are back, and they haven't worked at 5 or 6 different airports like you oftentimes have with large airports. So we saw that as a gap. We focused our entire business approach toward that in trying to assist the small airports in all aspects of their business, including general aviation. In 2018, we grew the practice from 2 people to 8 people. In 2018, we were purchased by Landerman Brown because they wanted to get into this airport segment also. Then through the RFP process, as Catherine mentioned, we were selected. I was the project manager for L&B for the Rules and Standards project, as well as the General Aviation Review project. So even though I've got a different logo now, I've been through this process from day one. I retired again, seems to be a pattern here, late last year from Landerman Brown and started my own consultancy, DCOM Aviation. And the idea was to continue to work with a few select airports as I try to wind down my professional life, work with a few small airports that I share a vision with and where I'd started work and tasks that I wanted to complete. Eugene was one of them. So that's why I'm not with Landerman Brown anymore. I'm with DCOM Aviation, but there is continuity in the background and the understanding of the issues facing Eugene. Let's go. So that's my background, probably more than you need to know, but I just want to let you know. Just 1 or 2 lessons. Testing, okay. Okay. I said I wanted to stand. So I wanted to give that background just to let you know that I think it's important as you go through change to realize it's just not somebody who's coming in and taking a snapshot view and putting my view into where Eugene should go. This is through working with, when I was with the airline, over 125 airports, and subsequently as a consultant, probably over 50 airports. I haven't done the count yet, but it's really, and the primary focus of those was small airports. So the question that we ask is on a leasing policy is the why, and Catherine alluded to it before. In 2020, airport management was tasked with reviewing all aspects of the management of Eugene and embarked on an overall organizational change process. They selected L&B, which Catherine covered with you. One of the first tasks we did on this assignment was to go through literally every lease that was on the books with Eugene. We looked at them, and after reviewing those leases, there was a great deal of variation in ground leasing policies, rates, terms and conditions, and how land rent was determined for each lease agreement. The goal of the development of a consistent policy is to eliminate those kinds of situations and create equal treatment for all similarly situated tenants so they get treated equitably and comply with FAA guidelines and grant assurances, and as Catherine mentioned, be a good steward of the assets of the community. The goal at the end is to adopt a policy that was consistent with other commercial airports in Oregon and the industry by also imposing good best industry practices. We talk about grant assurances a lot. There are 4 primary grant assurances that really relate to the establishment of the general aviation policy that we're proposing. One is Grant Assurance 5, which preserves the rights and powers for the airport. Airports are required, airport sponsors are required to preserve their rights and powers through appropriate clauses in all airport leases. Grant Assurance 22, which is economic non-discrimination. Sponsors are required to treat in a uniform manner those users making the same or similar use of the airport. Grant Assurance 24, which is fees and rental structure. Sponsor airports are required to be as financially self-sufficient as possible, which may include charging fair market rent for land and airport-owned improvements. Failure to include the reversion clause for improvements at the end of the lease term impacts the airport's ability to be financially self-sufficient. And last, Grant Assurance 38 of hangar construction. Airport sponsors are required to grant a long-term lease to non-commercial entities constructing a hangar for the entity's non-commercial hangar storage. We talked about industry standards and best practices. What we are recommending in the maximum term for the ground lease in the draft document is between 30 and 35 years. As you can see from the second bullet, the FAA order states that the term for most ground leases should be 30 to 35 years. We are consistent with that. I take that back. I want to correct what I said for the maximum term. We are not recommending. The maximum term for ground leases in Oregon is 30 to 35 years. 35 years representing some leases that are higher investment, which is consistent with the FAA policy. And that they do recommend 30 to 35 years. We are being more generous than that in our draft policy. And one of the reasons that what we're recommending, which is a 20 plus 20 term, is the IRS allows assets to be depreciated over 39 years. So someone who invests in a property can get their full depreciation for benefit of the IRS write-offs in that 40-year term. And as I mentioned before, airport sponsors are required to treat in a uniform manner those users making the same or similar use of the airport. Next slide. Land lease rates, as we found there in the study, there's a great inconsistency in land lease rates. The land lease rate is usually established by an appraisal. That's by far the most used methodology by airports when they're looking at having land lease rates established and then having means of adjusting the rates over the years. And again, in the FAA order, the ground leases with terms of 5 or more years should contain an escalation provision for periodic adjustments based on a recognized economic index as a means of facilitating parity between new lease agreements and existing lease agreements. Land rental rates are escalated periodically to support industry best practices and to increase non-airline revenue to support and allow the airport to absorb increased operating costs. Because you do not have tax subsidies for the airport, that money needs to be generated on the airport, and it's another means of generating that revenue. Next slide. One of the other inconsistencies we saw was how parcels were described and defined. There was a great variation on square footage and how it was calculated, what was calculated, and so the recommended policy will be that the full footprint of the site is what will be used for the footprint for the calculation of land rent to ensure that tenants can meet building setback requirements and allow for utilities provided for the site. Many of the leases today, the leases actually include nothing but the footprint of the building and not the full site. Tenants who also need land outside the building footprint to park vehicles and aircraft when not in the hangar, which is another reason why the full site is what is practically used. When these constraints are included, under the premise of the building footprint being the only piece that's leased, that effectively takes that land out of circulation for the airport to generate revenue on it, since it's dedicated to the needs of that individual tenant. The next item is what happens to the leasehold improvement at the expiration of the lease, and this will be under all new leases. There are three primary options that happen in the industry. The tenant may remove the structure at their cost and restore the site to its original condition. That's a very common provision in leases for general aviation, as well as other improvements made by airport tenants. After the lease term, the tenant may negotiate a lease agreement at the applicable land rate plus a revenue diversion fee that represents the value of the improvement to the airport in lieu of reversion. So this gets the airport the economic value they need to meet the grant assurance for financial self-sustainability, but still gives the ability for the tenant to continue the lease. And then the third option will be for the tenant, they may turn the improvement to the airport, i.e. reversion, and the airport assumes all ongoing responsibilities. So that include improvements, utilities, everything else. And so at that point, the building becomes a risk to the airport. Grant assurance 3024, fees and rental structure. The sponsor airports are required to be, and this is repeat of what I said before, required to be financially self-sufficient to the greatest degree possible and may charge fair market rent for land and airport owned improvements. Failure to include the reversion clause for improvements at the end of the lease term impacts the airport's ability to financially be self-sufficient. In summary, just want to reinforce, all existing leases will be honored. This is not imposing new terms under existing contractual relationships with the city of Eugene, so all existing leases will be honored. The airport's following industry best practices and developing the policies to be included in the leasing policy. The land lease terms are more flexible than the other commercial service airports in Oregon. The city is the sponsor of the airport and must comply with FAA guidelines and operate the airport to be financially self-sufficient to the greatest degree possible. In adopting the new leasing policy and standard form agreements will provide the city a roadmap to remedy the inconsistencies that we found and the non-compliance conditions that may be in existence from past agreements. Questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you, John. So a couple of comments, I guess, and questions as well. It seems, first of all, the city sponsor, we want to operate, the airport needs to be financially self-sufficient. I think for the last many years, at least as long as I've been on this committee, the airport has been very self-sufficient. I think we've carried surpluses that have been rolled over into capital improvements things. So to me, it makes perfect sense that we want to standardize leases, that we want to make it fair across the board, that we have the same definitions for what people are paying for. The part about the reversion seems to be a solution to a problem that doesn't really exist. Uh, in that it seems that the airport's been self-sufficient, operating fine. Uh, it seems like quite an extreme measure to be changing the way that leases are structured today. From my understanding is we're doing it because the FAA, we're at risk at losing our grants, but my understanding is also that that's not a real problem. Nobody has approached the airport. Nobody has told us that any of our funding is at risk. So we're putting in place proactive measures, which isn't necessarily bad, except that the way that they're affecting a lot of our airport tenants, people are going to be losing their businesses. Hangars are going to get more difficult to rent because there'll be a lack of them. There are hangars currently now that are on the market that are unsellable. So it seems like we're going above and beyond for a benefit, securing ourselves against something that might happen that isn't happening. But at the same time, we're really, destroying businesses, destroying people's lives by doing this. I don't quite understand why we're taking such extreme measures.
Just one comment and clarification. The reversion will apply to new leases only. All of the existing agreements, whatever is in those leases, in many cases, is not addressed. That this is not going to be imposed on those folks that have got existing agreements. So it shouldn't affect any ongoing business here. It would come into play in future discussions about future development and future leases.
I believe it is. I think I know for sure one of my colleagues who owns a building whose building is over 40 years old, that's going to essentially lose their building and not be able to continue using it, won't be able to renew the current lease that they have, and will be forced to pay whatever it is, hundreds of thousands of dollars to be able to continue operating at the airport.
I can't address specifics because I don't know what lease and hundreds of thousands of dollars. I can guarantee you that's far more than anything conceivable that could be out there.
So I think what we need to differentiate between here is an extension and a renewal. So existing leases, if there's an extension, those extensions are part of that lease agreement and those are being honored. Any new construction or renegotiating a new lease, right? So if you come to the end of the term, new leases would be have a new negotiation, and that's where these new policies would be put in place. But we have not finalized those things yet. We still have some things that we're working through. But the bottom line is that we are going to need to be looking at the lease terms we have in place, the length of some of the existing leases and the age of the buildings. And all of that becomes part of the equation of where we land eventually. And that's all under review by the attorney that we work with at the city attorney's office. So I don't have answers for you around specific hangar owners at this point. But I can tell you that we are working on those processes with our legal folks.
So as an advisory committee, I'm always sensitive to wanting to be cautious. Wanting to be cautious that we don't accidentally infer that we're recommending moving forward out of compliance with federal requirements, only because it puts us in a tough spot long-term for viability and solvency. My question is around what do we think, or what do we understand the FAA's intent with the reversion was solving for? What was the risk that the FAA is trying to mitigate by having a reversion clause, whether it's a requirement or preference?
So John, it goes back to the rights and powers grant assurance, right?
I'm sorry.
going back to the grant assurance slide. So John, I believe Courtney's question is, it would be about grant assurance 5, preserving rights and powers.
So the example would be like, if federal highways allowed people at one time to build a garage on an on-ramp to a freeway. I'm trying to figure out, like, if it went wrong and we didn't have reversions, what would be occurring that we would have a problem with? Would it be that somebody who is misusing the space and living in it as opposed to flying out of it wouldn't be removable, or?
I think the best answer I can give is, unlike commercial property outside the airport where you can have fee simple interest in the ownership of that land and you keep it as long as you want it, you cannot buy land that is on the airport. That is not, that's a given. And the FAA does not allow perpetual leases. I've had discussions with different FAA regional offices. They will not allow perpetual leases. So there has to be a term. And then the question is, what happens at the end of that term? We're presenting 3 options. So, to your point, if it were a garage on a highway, you simply remove it and then it goes to the highway. That's one of the options here. If somebody has a steel building, for instance, and this happens, I mean, this is not fictitious. If somebody has a steel building, there's still value of that at the end of the lease term. They may disassemble it and sell it or relocate it or put it on their farm, whatever it might be. So those are the decisions, and then or reversion. So those are the decisions that someone will be able to make under what is being proposed for the language. It's not we can't just say, for instance, okay, I've got a 40-year lease, and then when I'm done with that, it just rolls into another 40-year lease. The FAA will not allow that. Can they go and negotiate at the end of that 40-year lease? I think that's what Catherine's suggesting, is that, yes, I can sit down and have a conversation at the end of that 40-year lease and try and negotiate a new 40-year lease, but that would be under the terms and conditions in place at that time. Does that answer your question, I hope?
Yeah, I know it's complex, so.
It's not easy. I mean, this isn't my first rodeo about talking about reversion. It's something when you do implement it. That said, there are airports out there that don't give you the options. At the end of the lease, it reverts to the airport, game, set, match. So what we've been trying to do is we've looked at options for this, is to give people options. And again, this is going forward. This has nothing to do with any lease that's in existence today.
John, I believe I've seen an article where in California, AOPA had they were dealing with a similar issue in that recently, I think as recently as September, Governor Newsom signed a bill that addressed this issue and allowed for 50-year leases with options to renew on the same conditions going forward. Is that something you're familiar with, or
Yes,
can
it
you
is.
share a little
I
more?
read it this morning, as a matter of
Okay.
fact. And I think you'll find that will probably be litigated, because that is absolutely inconsistent with what I have personally heard from FAA officials as far as not having perpetual leases. And I've had to take some deals to various ADOs to see if they would be in support of it. And that's a message that's come through universally, regardless of what region I'm in. Catherine?
Yeah, I forwarded that article to our compliance officer just to get a quick read on it. And he said that apparently that legislation was put through with no consultation from the FAA. So it's going to be problematic. They're going to have to do some work around that. His initial read on it was that's not going to work under FAA grant assurances. So Tina?
Okay, so we're really close to time for the meeting to end, but I want to open it up for public comment. So are there any guests that have a question or comment?
There's one person that did sign up to speak. Stephen Bolton, did you still want to speak at all?
I'm gonna defer what I have to say until later, not in this meeting.
I got a question. Is it possible to get a printed copy of Mr. My last name, I'm sorry?
DeCosta.
DeCastro, is it possible to get a printed copy of his presentation? Yes. Or is it available online?
It will be, the minutes, it will go into the minutes.
Yeah, online today.
I don't know if it will be online today, but it will be online as early as probably Monday or Tuesday. I can try. I can try and get something to you today.
Appreciate it. Thanks, sir.
Okay, it is 1 o'clock.
Yes, I won't speak then.
What's that? Yes, I have my hand up almost the entire time, so I would like.
Okay, okay, we'll comment and then we'll adjourn.
So can you clarify the definition of reversion? Because under the Greek definition of reversion, it is something that you have owned, or the city in this case, has owned prior to leasing it out and then taking it back. So the city doesn't own these hangars. These hangars were built by individuals or businesses. So how is reversion being used correctly in this situation?
The airport owns the land. The land is leased to the tenant. The tenant invests in the building. At the end of that lease, there's three options for that tenant. They can remove, they can negotiate an extension, a new agreement, or
fee
reversion.
attached to that.
Don't know that. Or they can, the building will revert so that you wouldn't have to go through the expense of having to demolish it and restore the land. That's the intent of the reversion policy.
Revert would go back to me, the owner of the building. The land can go back to the city, but the building is owned by me. So revert is not the correct term to be used. It's confiscation.
It could revert to you, but what I'm understanding is really it's the control. The control of the land reverts back.
The control
of the land as it existed pre the tenant reverts back to the city. The building could revert to the owner to take off, or you could relinquish it,
That's correct.
but it's land reversion.
Reversion is the commonly used industry term for the situation you're talking about. If you want to take the building off the site, that is you can do that. And then the land will revert to the city.
I've been through 50, I fail to find any reference to the word reversion or that process in the context of confiscating private property. Every instance that is used in the document, it refers to the airport sponsor returning material or equipment that was provided them by a grant by the federal government, and the airport sponsor no longer either using it correctly or needing to use it at all. Then it reverts to the federal government. That's the definition that's in SIP 5196B. Is there another document that you can cite where it's used to confiscate personal property?
That's not it's two different things.
I don't think that's germane to the subject that we're trying to present today. So I'll defer to staff and the board.
So thank you everyone for participating and your comments, and we are going to adjourn the meeting 1:04.